Hi, welcome to this presentation on how cannabis helps dementia.
Thank you for taking the time to hear our story and learn what we came to know. How and why cannabis medicine can be a safe and effective tool to help relieve symptoms of dementia, improve brain health, and ease other symptoms of aging, including end of life.
Plus, you'll learn about how much people are using, how often, and hear specific ways people use cannabis medicine to ease the symptoms of dementia.
I'm Chela.
And I'm Dave. And right up front, we'd like to say that we're not doctors or medical professionals of any kind, and nothing you hear in this webinar should be considered medical advice.
Right. We work below the line in film and television production. But in 2010, after my mom was diagnosed with mixed dementias, vascular and Alzheimer's disease, we dove into family caregiving and became fierce advocates for people living with dementia. In memory of Mom and to honor our journey together, we started providing care gap training for other family care partners and created Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast, interviewing clinicians as well as people living with dementia and their families about how cannabis is helping.
To spread the message even further, we've also launched a study guide style book series on CBD and medicinal cannabis for complex issues. The first in our Canna Guide series, CBD for Seniors, 12 Things to Know When Trying CBD or Medicinal Cannabis to Ease Symptoms of Aging or Improve Brain Health, is available now on Amazon.
Other subjects coming soon include cancer, heart disease, chronic illness, sobriety, and end of life. You can find info about them at CoachChela.com.
To get to this point, we've interviewed dozens of doctors, nurses, professional researchers, administrators, other caregivers, and people living with dementia about how cannabis helps.
Like it did for our family.
That's right.
In the beginning, of course, we noticed my mom was forgetting stuff, repeating stories, but she kind of always did that.
She wasn't taking her medications properly either.
Wait till you get old, my mom would say.
And she hadn't been cooking much.
I've cooked for people all my life. I'm done.
She would get lost driving, but that wasn't so unusual either. She always had a bad sense of direction.
Every time I try to go to Macy's, I end up across town at the grocery store.
Finally, Mom paid her bills multiple times in the same month and became seriously overdrawn.
That's what alerted us that something was very wrong.
Mom fell a few times, but she refused to see a doctor.
The last fall was spectacular enough to scare her into a visit to the emergency room.
At the hospital, and after an astonishingly short evaluation, the doctor said flatly, "Ms. Seagram, you have dementia."
In another room, the social worker told us, "You know she can't live alone, right?"
And just like that, our whole world was turned upside down. We've come to learn that this scenario plays out again and again as more and more seniors are diagnosed after serious symptoms arise or they're involved in an accident.
Yeah, families are devastated by a diagnosis of dementia, and most fall apart after that diagnosis. Thankfully, ours came together along with a handful of friends to support us on our journey.
But in the beginning, we were totally clueless, self-centered, lacked resources and practical skills.
So we started to get educated. We read dozens of books on Alzheimer's and related dementias, did loads of research, went to support groups, and every doctor visit with research in hand and questions galore. But we were still clueless, and our doctors didn't have any answers either. Advocacy groups and governmental organizations have all but given up on a cure and are focusing on brain health and prevention as a solution to this devastating diagnosis.
Which is great for people who don't have dementia yet, but we desperately need safe and effective treatments for people suffering today.
Right, back to our story.
Like many, we cared for Mom at home the first 4 years. Initially, it was complete triage, constantly reacting to the major changes for all of us. When we began this journey in 2010, we only knew Alzheimer's was a terrible disease that was bad news for your memory.
Of course, any form of dementia is no joke for all concerned. The irony is that the only way we could get through it was to laugh and find the positive aspects.
However, that took us quite some time to figure out. Little did we know the answer was in our stash box all along.
As born and raised Angelinos, we've been familiar with cannabis throughout much of our lives. It helped me with migraine headaches, IBS, anxiety, and pain.
But we didn't realize the full potential of cannabis medicine until Mom got sick.
But when my mom was first diagnosed with dementia, her doctors were very much against her using cannabis at all.
Oh, she can't use marijuana. It's bad for her memory.
Right. So we kept it away from her for the first year or so.
We didn't know anything about drug-drug interactions. We didn't really know anything, and we trusted that her doctors knew what was best.
Yeah.
It was hard to tell the difference between side effects of the new prescription medication Mom was on and the symptoms of Alzheimer's progression. Despite the fact that they're known to increase one's risk for dementia, Mom's doctors prescribed a benzodiazepine for her relentless anxiety and agitation, which worked great the first day.
But she had an adverse reaction the day after when she called me all kinds of terrible names, accusing me of trying to kill her. So we lost that tool.
They prescribed a powerful antipsychotic for the severe aggression.
They called it dementia-related psychosis. There's a notice on the bottle that has a black box around it that reads,
Warning: increased mortality in elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis. Elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis treated with antipsychotic drugs are at an increased risk of death. Not approved for the treatment of patients with dementia-related psychosis.
But Medicare paid for it. She was much nicer on the antipsychotic medication for a few days. But then back to the name-calling freakouts.
They prescribed a different antipsychotic with the same warning to replace the first one.
They prescribed an antidepressant because she was terribly depressed that she was losing her mind, her freedom, herself.
They prescribed an anticonvulsant, a powerful seizure medication that has a similar black box warning to relieve Mom's restlessness and constant questions.
She never stopped asking the same questions over and over. And she developed a tremor, an ironic side effect of the anticonvulsant medication.
They prescribed another antidepressant off-label to help Mom's insomnia. And of course, eventually they prescribed the common drugs that are supposed to slow down the disease process. All these medications have serious side effect warnings, including kidney and liver damage, organ failure, stroke, and sudden death.
Which we might be willing to risk if they actually helped. On all the prescription meds, taken as prescribed, and on their lowest doses, Mom fell frequently. Some of the less severe side effects of these drugs included nervousness, restlessness, and inability to sit still, which is particularly troublesome when there's also weakness, loss of balance, and dizziness.
She experienced all those side effects, and worse, the meds didn't do anything for the symptoms we were trying to treat.
Mom's falls forced me to take time off work, which is when we began to wise up.
Mom had refused to get out of bed for 3 weeks. Somehow she had remembered she had fallen several times and was terrified to fall again.
Her doctors were calling it failure to thrive.
And we thought sure this was it.
So I was in her room one afternoon, the TV was on, and I was researching side effects and drug-drug interactions and having a puff. Mom turns to me and says, I want some of that. So I called her doctor, and her doctor said,
Look, she's not getting out of bed. Give her anything she wants.
So we shared a joint. And before we finished, Mom says to me, let's go to the living room and watch TV.
This began our discovery.
At first, we learned the U.S. Department of Health held a patent on cannabinoids since 1998 as
neuroprotectants, for example, in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults such as stroke and trauma, or in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease.
That's patent number 6630507B1. And that led us to realizing that actually cannabis helps dementia.
A quick PubMed search reveals study after study that cannabinoids ease the terrible symptoms of dementia, like anxiety, agitation, insomnia, restlessness, anorexia, aggression, depression, and more, better than anything available on the market, with no risk of sudden death.
A documentary called The Scientist shows us that every care home in Israel uses cannabis medicine for their elderly.
Mainstream media sources show that there are facilities in California, dozens that we know of, one in New York State, and another in Florida that are currently using full-spectrum cannabis oil, or CBD, for people living with dementia.
More than 2/3 of all state departments of health list Alzheimer's disease or other neurodegenerative diseases on their qualifying conditions for medical cannabis, and more come online every election cycle. When cannabis is on the ballot, not only does it often win big, but it brings more people out to vote.
Mom had greater focus and interaction when she was medicated with cannabis.
She laughed, smiled, and communicated with us. It was like she dropped into her body and was able to connect better. She was able to relax and go with the flow.
Cannabis helped Mom have a carefree attitude about losing her mind.
Which helped everybody. But cannabis is expensive. Medicare doesn't pay for it, and it's not covered by any insurance yet.
As the disease progressed and our resources were drained, we had to move Mom into a facility.
Despite our preference to keep her at home with us.
The nursing home said they would throw us out if we used cannabis, a Schedule I drug. The first nursing home Mom was in actually did throw her out.
After drug testing her for marijuana and telling me to knock it off or they would ask us to leave.
They kicked Mom out after an incident when another woman pushed her from behind as they were walking to an activity.
The facility wasn't medicating her agitation or aggression appropriately.
Or at all.
Right? And they wouldn't let us do it either. So what did we expect?
We were forced to move Mom into another facility where she lived for nearly 5 years.
After a nearly decade-long journey through dementia, Mom passed on February 1st, 2019. Cannabis medicine helped ease my mom's symptoms from the moment we started using it until her last breath, but only when she had access to it.
As we'll demonstrate with the help of some of the experts that we've interviewed, cannabis medicine can help ease the terrible symptoms of dementia in most people, is generally recognized as safe, and is worth trying.
After the news of fabricated evidence, misleading research for decades, and wasting millions of dollars, there remains no end in sight for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias.
And now with the possibility of COVID increasing risk of Alzheimer's, it's urgent to expand where we search for solutions to one of the scariest threats to human health and our national and global economy.
We must actually be bold and ask questions and try new things.
What if there were a scientifically recognized system in the body that regulates all the other bodily systems but wasn't taught in medical school?
That'd be weird, right?
How many of you know that we do have a system like that called the Endocannabinoid System, or ECS?
Well, we made a 2-minute video about the ECS to help understand how cannabis works in the body.
Cannabis has been the subject of so many jokes and stereotypes, and so much propaganda, that it's hard for some people to imagine that marijuana could be a legitimate medical treatment.
Maybe you smoked some pot in college, or tried the brownie your nephew gave you, or you or a loved one may have overused cannabis and can't imagine how it could be medicine. But science tells us that cannabis is indeed just that.
It's impossible to understand that cannabis is medicine without knowing something about the endocannabinoid system.
Like that it exists, for instance. A quick PubMed search yields over 6,000 research studies on the subject.
Problem is, most medical professionals don't study anything about the endocannabinoid system in medical school or continuing education, due in part to the outdated federal policy on cannabis prohibition.
Cannabinoids, the chemical compounds in cannabis and other plants as well, interact with many parts of the body. Until the 1990s, we didn't know how exactly.
Then researchers traced where a THC molecule landed and began to discover that we have a system in our body that regulates all the other systems through chemistry.
The system in the body that interacts with plant cannabinoids was discovered, and then researchers found chemicals that our own bodies make that interact with that same system.
It's called the endocannabinoid system, and the compounds we make in our bodies are called endogenous or endocannabinoids.
The endocannabinoid system is established in scientific literature. Researchers are finding that the endocannabinoid system is involved in balancing nearly every system of the body.
It's interesting that even though the endocannabinoid system is established science, most healthcare professionals don't learn about it and still don't understand how cannabis helps people.
Make sure you ask your doctor if they've studied the endocannabinoid system before you ask them if cannabis medicine is right for you.
We began to learn the extent of the critical endocannabinoid system when we attended our first medicinal cannabis conference in 2018. It was incredible to see so many medical professionals at a major university all interested in and talking about cannabis and the potential of cannabis medicine.
Yeah, it was like a cannabis medicine nerd Coachella. We went because there was going to be a panel on cannabis and Alzheimer's that we were really excited about. At CanMed 2018, we first heard Dr. Ethan Russo presenting findings on how cannabis helps balance the gut microbiome and how the gut microbiome impacts brain health.
Dr. Russo is a board-certified neurologist and highly accomplished psychopharmacology researcher. He served as senior medical advisor to GW Pharmaceuticals, the maker of Epidiolex, the FDA-approved epilepsy medicine made from cannabidiol, or CBD, as well as Sativex, a balanced 1-to-1 ratio CBD to THC oral mucosa spray that is approved in 30-plus countries, but not yet in the U.S.
When Sativex comes online in the U.S., it's going to be a game changer. We had a chance to sit down with Dr. Russo briefly at another conference shortly after his 2018 review article, Cannabis Therapeutics and the Future of Neurology, was published in Frontiers in Integrative Neuroscience.
Here's Dr. Russo chatting with us about how cannabis helps dementia.
The problem right now is there have been individual studies of various cannabinoids, specifically THC and cannabidiol, in relation to mechanisms, the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease. There really haven't been any large clinical studies, however, and that's what we really need now. There have been a few studies specifically of synthetic THC as Marinol, specifically to look at agitation and sleep in Alzheimer's with positive results. But as most people know, THC alone is a very poorly tolerated drug, whereas cannabis that contains other components, particularly cannabidiol and a good terpenoid content, is going to be much better tolerated and potentially really contribute much more usefully to the benefits of cannabis in this patient group. Specifically, one of the things that I'd like to be able to demonstrate is that the terpenoid called pinene has an effect actually to boost short-term memory. Drugs like pinene, which are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, boost the amount of acetylcholine in the brain. That's the memory molecule. And so this, in conjunction with the other benefits of THC and other cannabis components, really presents a sort of multifocal approach to treating Alzheimer's. On the one hand, treating symptoms, but also we have good lab evidence that THC and CBD can interfere with the buildup of abnormal proteins in the brain. That's one of the hallmarks of the disorder.
Right. It's my thinking that more studies need to be done for the treatment of the disease, but right now there are states where people living in those states could go to a dispensary and get something for their symptoms.
Right. Well, this is a good demonstration that this is a bottom-up movement. What I mean by that is that, unfortunately, physicians have been slow to get on board with cannabis, and the real movement is by patients and their families demonstrating to their doctors that, hey, if you see a benefit here as compared to last month when she wasn't on this, it's because of cannabis, because we're not doing anything differently except for that. So it's going to be a slow evolution. With that, we need progress with the laws as well, so that we can do the studies properly and that this is more generally available.
What do you think about hemp in the Farm Bill passing? Do you think that's going to help?
Well, it may, but in this instance, we need some THC in the materials. That's what really treats the agitation and helps with sleep. It is a combination of THC, CBD, and other components that presents the best promise for really making a meaningful difference in treating Alzheimer's disease clinically.
The review article that first introduced us to his work was mind-blowing because it cited so many studies that showed how cannabis helps Alzheimer's disease, as well as many other difficult neurological conditions.
At the end of the Alzheimer's section, he breaks down which cannabis compounds and terpenes address which symptoms.
With my mom, we found full-spectrum cannabis oil given 2 to 3 times a day in her food to be very helpful to ease her tough behavioral symptoms. When you ingest cannabis oil, it tends to last 4 to 6 hours, but the onset is much slower than under the tongue or inhaled. That big, amazing medical cannabis conference Alzheimer's panel we were so excited to hear didn't include any clinicians using cannabis medicine at the time.
But when they opened it up to audience questions, a general practitioner from Northern California, Dr. Jeffrey Hergenrather, was the first at the microphone to share his experience working with people living with dementia in assisted living facilities and at home in Northern California.
Dr. Hergenrather has used plant medicine throughout his long and distinguished career. He works with many seniors in Northern California who are and have been using full-spectrum cannabis oil for years to ease all kinds of age-related issues, especially with dementia.
In 1999, Dr. Hergenrather co-founded with Dr. Todd Mikaria and others the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. On the SCC website, there's a search tool where you can find knowledgeable cannabis medicine doctors in your area and those who do telemedicine.
There are also educational resources, a research library, videos, and courses taught by experts in the field.
In this clip, Dr. Hergenrather shares his theory on the effects of an aging endocannabinoid system and his ongoing practice with seniors.
The endocannabinoid system wears down. It just isn't the same as you get older as it is when you're young. And it may explain a lot of the changes that we find as we age, because people that otherwise didn't have problems like that at all in their younger years, and then they get to be elderly and now they're not sleeping very well at all. Now they're very anxious, and anxious where it's not good. It's go to the hospital with anxiety, kind of anxiousness. And these people may not have been anxious in their youth. And pain is harder to control. And really a number of other conditions that are modulated or that are mitigated by the endocannabinoid system jumping into action. And when this system isn't working as well in the elderly, we know that 2-AG and some of the natural cannabinoids aren't found in the same concentrations in the elderly and in Alzheimer's dementia. So we have evidence that this system is wearing down. And so we can use cannabis to our benefit to augment that natural system. It just makes sense. Well, my association with a local psychiatrist, Dr. Phil Grobe, we connected with the owners and the managers of this facility and the nursing staff, and probably most importantly, the nursing staff was really favoring the idea of using cannabis medicine. So we began to intervene by saying, okay, let's try 5 milligrams of THC or 10 milligrams of THC, or let's blend it with THC and CBD. And we began to kind of work toward medicines that seemed to work best. And as the patients would present with agitated behaviors, psychiatric problems of significance, the families were asking for medications. They were asking the psychiatrist to intervene and see if we could help. And it turned out that the cannabis was really working better than anything else. Now, if I'm doing this with somebody in my office, I might say, okay, let's just start with 1 milligram of each. You're not going to feel this. I just want you to get comfortable and confident in using this. And then in a few days or next week, we can double the dose to 2 milligrams of each. And then we may go to 3 and 4 and 5. And over the course of a month or even more, we'll adjust the dose to find what works, and they develop the tolerance much more slowly. I can't tell you how many people I have that come to me saying, we want the CBD.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they've been hearing the media, they've been understanding that maybe CBD is the medicine of cannabis. The public thinks that THC is dangerous in many cases. So a lot of my role is to explain, we can try CBD as a dominant molecule. In medical marijuana grown for CBD, the high CBD strains, I let them know right off that it may be 20 to 1 CBD to THC. It might be 30 to 1. It might be 18 to 1, depending on the product line. But it's predominantly CBD, but it's a whole spectrum of molecules, and it works better with that whole spectrum of molecules. And don't be shopping on the internet for pure CBD. It's not really what you want.
Dr. Hergenrather works with Dr. Philip Grobe, a geriatric psychiatrist with nearly 30 years' experience working with people living with dementia, primarily those with severe behavioral disturbance.
Dr. Grobe is also a member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians with an extensive practice in Northern California.
Well, it was a patient, over 10 years now, who had a fairly advanced dementia. And she was highly agitated, disrupting to the household she was in and keeping everybody up at night. And I tried basically every class of psychiatric medication I could throw at her, and she either didn't respond or couldn't tolerate it. So finally I went to her durable power of attorney for healthcare and suggested cannabis. And after much hemming and hawing, she finally consented because she didn't know what else to do. And this individual showed a remarkable therapeutic response. And ever since then, I've been looking into the therapeutic uses of cannabis, and have been applying it and recommending it at times when it appeared appropriate. I tend to use more CBD to THC ratio in cannabis-naive peoples because we have therapeutic value without the potential psychoactive concerns that many people are apprehensive about. Well, the dosing is interesting. There is no one-size-fits-all. Many of the experts suggesting cannabis-naive individuals to start at a very, very low dose, for instance, 1 to 2 milligrams in the evening. I tend to be a little more aggressive, and I will frequently employ, say, a 1-to-1 ratio of 5 milligrams of CBD and 5 milligrams of THC twice a day, and adjust based on the individual's response. But as I'm learning more, I think there's wisdom in starting at a lower dose and just getting a sense of an individual's sensitivity and response before pushing it.
Dr. Grobe works with patients in nearly all the memory care facilities in and around Sonoma County using cannabis medicine.
Past president of the American Cannabis Nurses Association and geriatric nurse practitioner Eloise Thiessen is a frequent presenter at CanMed. We spoke with Eloise about her experience using cannabis for age-related illnesses and particularly for people living with dementia.
In 2021, board member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, Dr. Dustin Sulak of Healer.com from Maine, wrote The Handbook of Cannabis for Clinicians, and it's an invaluable resource.
Renowned cannabis specialist Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who has a practice in Orange County, California, literally wrote the book called Cannabis is Medicine.
These 3 clinicians lead the medical practicum at CanMed. We also spoke with each of them for the podcast.
Early on, I was recommending CBD as a treatment for the anxiety in my dementia patients who were female. And I'll never forget this story. The daughter had durable power of healthcare, and she'd come in with her mom, and I said, okay, I want you to go to the dispensary and I want you to get this. And it was this, CBD edible. It was from cannabis. It wasn't a hemp derived CBD product. And she goes to the dispensary, and the dispensary staff was like, no, you need a 1-to-1, really tried to talk this woman into something else. And, I got on the phone. I said, thank you very much. I'm confident in what I'm doing. And I'm going to go ahead and have her get her CBD. Well, lo and behold, she gets the CBD edible, and the facility administers it to her, and it makes her anxiety worse, to the point where she was screaming and yelling, and she had this worsening of symptoms.
Oh, no.
The facility wanted to throw her out as a result of it. It was so disruptive. And, the daughter was such a good sport. She called me up and she said, well, that didn't work. What do you think I should do? And I decided to just try THC because I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We do see reports that CBD in very low doses can be stimulating.
Right.
And some people have reported, increase in anxiety with low doses of CBD.
Mm-hmm.
They've reported agitation,
Mm-hmm.
kind of feeling, like they're have too much caffeine.
Mm.
So I decided to try just THC, very low dose, 2 milligrams.
Mm-hmm.
The facility dispensed that to her, and within 2 days, I got a call from the daughter. My mom is a completely different person. I can actually take her out now for meals and go out in public. She's calm. She's smiling. She's engaging in conversation. I mean, she wasn't, she didn't have this remarkable recovery from her dementia, but her quality of life was greatly improved.
Yeah.
And
on
then
just a couple of milligrams, even.
Just 2 milligrams.
How
No
many
side
times a
effects.
day?
In this particular woman, it was twice a day, and sometimes it's once, sometimes it's 3 times a day.
Amazing.
It was really remarkable to see a dose low enough to not cause any adverse effects and just benefits.
I mean, when it comes to cannabis or cannabinoids and dementia, I think even though the clinical evidence that's published in the scientific literature is limited, it's almost universally favorable. I know there was one study that was using, I think, just 1 or 1.2 milligrams of synthetic THC that didn't have really impressive results, and that's probably because the dose was too low. But everywhere else, a study of 15 people here, a study of 40 people there, we're all pretty much seeing the same thing, which is, global improvement. It's not just improvement in one thing, but it's really all across the board. Symptoms improve, and quality of life improves, and caregivers really like their jobs better when people aren't screaming all the time. When I started talking about sleep and pain, I was really emphasizing the THC component of it. And I do emphasize that. I think anyone who sets out to treat someone with dementia with cannabis as a tool and thinks that means using only CBD, I think they're going to be very disappointed.
There's one patient I wrote about in my book. Her husband had reached out to me early onset dementia. She was really struggling. She had even been on so many medications, and even when they were doing a medication switch, they deemed it so difficult that they put her in the hospital just to wean her down on one medicine and get her started on another, because her behaviors were unpredictable, and it just, the chance of something going south was pretty high for this particular patient. And after 1 month of being in the hospital, he said, she's dying in front of my eyes. Her decline is so rapid.
Yeah.
And we've heard about cannabis. We have no idea what we're doing. Our primary care doctor's on board. The neurologist is kind of like thrown their hands up and said, go right ahead, because I don't have much else to offer after 4
Right.
years of, and all hardcore drugs. I mean, antipsychotics and all difficult drugs. I think we started CBD first, and it agitated her. And that can happen. And we
Sure.
tried, and it's very important to understand low doses for CBD can be alerting and stimulating. CBD is an alerting, stimulating compound in low doses. Medium doses, you may not see that. And then higher doses, it tends to be more calming and sedating. You'll say, well, what's a high dose? Well, it depends on you. It depends on what's a
Depends,
high
right.
dose for
Right.
you. How much do you absorb? How much do you metabolize? How does your body respond specifically? What's your endocannabinoid tone? What's going on in the rest of your brain? I had been at the time doing a lot of research on THCA, which is tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, which is the precursor raw compound to THC. So anybody listening who doesn't know what THCA is, remember the female flower of the plant is where we get all these compounds. And if you harvest the plant and have raw, if you got that tested, most of all the cannabinoids in the flower would be in what we call the raw form, the AA acid form. So we refer to it in numerous different ways. And we started her on that. And she had real profound improvement in her mood, in her sleep. When I say THCA, I'm always referring to whole plant, full spectrum, reliable product that's been tested. I know what's in the bottle. And so this made a big difference for her. And even to the point where she was basically catatonic. I mean, she just sat. And if you messed with her, she'd argue with you. And she had full-time care, 24/7.
Yeah.
People in the house helping out with all activities of daily living. So feeding herself, bathing, getting dressed, getting undressed, getting in and out of bed, taking a walk, all of these things kind of just, that she didn't do anything. She didn't even look at me when I did my evaluation. She closed her eyes and just looked away. So THCA changed a lot of that. 3 times a day, start low and go slow. 1 milligram 3 times a day, 2 milligrams 3 times a day. And we titrated up very slowly to try to find her sweet spot. And little by little, I'm getting reports. She's happier. She stopped talking completely, I think, years prior. And she used to sing a lot. She started singing again.
Nice.
She was able to sit at the table and eat. She started to feed herself. She was participating in the getting dressed, getting undressed, bathing. So a lot of improvement. Now, for the moments of agitation here and there, what we did was we added in THC on an as needed basis. Again, starting low dose, 1 milligram, just as needed, 2 milligrams as needed. Again, there are the doubters out there. This is what I'm going to say. Your cannabinoid receptors, the most widespread receptor in the brain. It's just about everywhere. Where is it not? It's not in the part of your brain that can turn off your breathing. So if you take too much opioid, you stop breathing and die. Hence the opioid crisis that we're having. Okay. But the cannabinoid receptors are not in that part of the brain. And that is why you can get pain relief, anxiety relief, depression relief, better sleep, better appetite, think about all of those things. That's kind of what your cannabinoid system controls. It just absolutely helps with all of these kind of like baseline daily quality
Immune.
of life issues. Your immune system.
It's all over the white
Your-
blood cells,
and-
right? It's
and
under
your,
their,
and your gut.
yeah, and your
All
gut.
over your gut. And the
Yep.
gut, think about, you know, and there are still people not being taught this, but the microbiome and the way your gut works to interact with the food that you eat is critical for brain health.
Dr. Sherry Afai has a practice in Santa Monica, California, and does telemedicine. Dr. Afai is a board-certified emergency room physician who transitioned into cannabis medicine in 2017.
Dr. Sherry is also a board member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. She provides education and lectures to physicians, and currently about 50% of her practice consists of seniors.
My oldest patient is roughly 99 to 100. And a lot of people are like, can you use it when people are that old? Yeah, you can. You know, it's the same idea. You know, we're using this to help them, not to hurt them, right? We're helping move their arthritic pains along so that they can move better and faster, so that they can go out and get that good, healthy exercise in and see the sunlight. The patient is about 80 something. She lives in an assisted living facility. She moved to Los Angeles from the mid United States area, and a bit of that upheaval, and part of it was because she was starting to go through some of the dementia and more aggressive dementia symptoms and couldn't be alone in her own home anymore. So when she moved to Los Angeles, some of that upheaval created some problems. And so she was having some insomnia as well and wasn't getting along with caretakers. We started her with a hemp CBD product during the daytime and added it in a THC product at night. And that's where I find some of the edibles to be very helpful because they last a lot longer through the night. She started kind of changing her tune a little bit. And what we did was we started slowly adding in some THC during the day as well. So I believe ultimately she's on a 4-to-1 product. So it's a mixture of CBD and THC during the day and a THC product or THC dominant product at night. And what you'll see in the videos is her dancing and singing. And that's, you know, she plays with music that brings her joy in the afternoon, and she'll get up and dance and sing with her daughter. And she'll, you know, she the best part of her shines through.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're looking for. So it's really a testament to the medicine. We're seeing research studies coming out of Germany talking about how THC specifically given to dementia-induced mice delay that onset of dementia, and not just delay, but they do better for the longer period of time. You know, whether it's behavioral, so aggressive behavior that we see with a lot of older adults going through dementia and Alzheimer's, whether it's sleep disorders, insomnia, frequent wake-ups, you know, they're not as active during the day, they get up a little bit more frequently at night, and then that's the vicious cycle that continues. And we know, by the way, that sleep is incredibly helpful for prevention of dementia. So that's one thing we know, right? Very clear. So if we can get people to sleep better, then maybe we can help kind of delay a little bit more of that onset. And then there's the other aspect. Could this even be helpful, right? Just for the actual disease state itself.
We're excited about Dr. Sherry's upcoming study. It takes bold patients and care partners to share their stories in order to help others.
We met Stephen Barbieri in Sacramento right after my mom passed, when we went to lobby the assembly with a large advocacy organization asking our electeds to be bold and fund more research for dementia.
Known as the Kickmaster, Stephen spent 4 decades in Taekwondo with a rank of master's level and eventually was diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy from repeated head injuries. Using just CBD and THCA, the non-intoxicating raw form of THC, Stephen appears to be thriving with CTE dementia since 2012.
We spoke with the Kickmaster and his wife Tracy for the podcast about how they got started with cannabis medicine.
I'll actually let my wife tell the story because when I grew up, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I've never done drugs. I don't know if you want to say a square or whatever, it wasn't my type of lifestyle. So when Tracy was mentioning, let's try well, she was saying pot. She wasn't using the word cannabis. Let's try pot and this. And I'm like, no, 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 no. And that went on for literally, I think, almost 2 years.
Ah,
Pushing. Finally, she says, you like to research things. So why don't you do some research and stuff? I'll talk about it later. And I'll let her finish the story.
So things had gotten a little heated. Stephen's emotions were kind of all over the place. That aggression with his type of dementia was starting to really affect our marriage, affect our life here. And I was at school one day and I was very upset because of his behaviors had gotten, I wanted him to be on kind of some mood stabilizer, something. And I had even called the doctor on my own in tears and said, I need some help, you know, and she said, well, he has to be willing to take these mood stabilizers. And he was not willing, because one of the number one side effects with CTE is suicide. Most of the mood stabilizers, their side effects are suicide.
yeah.
So I was talking to a friend at school and he uses CBD. He said, listen, just get him to try it, see how it works. Just please, I know this is going to help him. Here's some research. So he gave me a little bit of things. I, brought them home to Stephen. Can you just research this? Just try it, because it's either you try the CBD or you do the mood stabilizers, or we can't live like this.
Yeah.
One of us is gonna go.
Yeah.
And we don't want to break up our marriage over this, but this is bad. So he researched it and finally was willing to go. We went to the dispensary here in town and we spoke with a gentleman who has the same exact diagnosis as Stephen.
I would come home from the gym or from boxing. I would put the CBD underneath my tongue before I got into the shower. And my dosage that ended up working for me. I started with the 500 milligrams of CBD with 0.3 of THC. And the reason they explained about the 0.3 of the THC is so that it would cross into the brain barrier. It allowed it to cross in. And then it's mixed with MCT, which is the coconut oil, because it's an oil to get through the body. We started at the 500, and then over time, I think the last couple of years or a year or so, I moved up to 1,000 milligrams still with the 0.3 of the THC. And I just take about 3/4 of an eyedropper underneath my tongue. And it basically I used to say it just levels me out and keeps me vanilla. It used to be every single day around 2 or 2:30, like a cell phone, my personal battery would die. In a sense of my brain, I was like overstimulated, too much going on. I literally had to go into a dark room and take a nap every day for an hour, sometimes 2 hours. I was just exhausted. Well, since I've taken this, for me, I don't have to take that nap any longer, which now means at bedtime, I'm more sleepy. Whereas, as you know, with most people with dementia, they have broken sleep. So that's why earlier we were saying I like to research, because I would be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And what was I doing? I was always on the computer trying to educate myself on what I could do and what I needed to do and what were some of the things out there. So this gets me through the day. But again, at nighttime, I still have problems about sleeping. So I have something called THCA. And so I take it out every night before bed, and I take just about a half of it, 1/3, probably close to a half of an eyedropper of this, and a Sensei Chew chocolate that's got some CBD and melatonin in it. And I get a good 7 to 8 hours worth of sleep now. And because I don't have that broken sleep at night, I'm more functionable during the day. The medication that the doctors give you, I believe there's only 5 dementia medicines out there. All of them have terrible side effects. And sometimes the side effects are worse. So if you're already having hallucinogenic situations, all of these medicines, that's another side effect. So all it does is increase that hallucinogenic. I used to see a shadow guy in my room at night. And when I got off the Aricept and I moved to the CBD, that shadow guy has gone.
Not going to cry. I will say 100% it saved our marriage. Because without it, the mood swings, the aggression that was there from his disease was not tolerable for us as a family. And with the cannabis, With the CBD, that is gone. There's a lot of stigma. That's the problem. And I think people need to get away from that because this works. And I would much rather Stephen is on something natural, something beneficial that I know is not going to have those side effects. And his mood, I'm not kidding you guys, it's 100%.
Registered nurse Dan O'Brien has been the wellness director at Primrose Engaged Living in Santa Rosa, California for nearly a decade.
Dan gave us his thoughts on how cannabis medicine is helping his residents.
We also had, at that time, one particular case of a person with significant behavioral complications who required actually a large amount and variety of medications, prescription medications. And I discovered that almost everything that she was getting was ineffective without the use of cannabis as a kind of like a floor to put under it all. That alone, it's only an anecdotal story, but basically everything that we're working on here is kind of based on just our history and our experience. There's no question in my mind that cannabis and its various formulations that we've used here has been quite effective.
Teepa Snow is a world-renowned dementia expert and occupational therapist with 40 years of clinical practice in all different settings. Teepa founded a revolutionary approach to support and engage people experiencing changes in brain function and their care partners called Positive Approach to Care.
We, of course, read her books and watched all of her free videos on YouTube before taking her certified training course and seeing her in person. Because of her occupational therapist perspective, Teepa teaches how to physically connect with our loved ones when words are failing. Even though it was near the end of my mom's journey, when she was in hospice, Teepa's techniques helped me connect with my mom in ways I didn't think possible. Being able to know if she wanted to eat or not, for instance, was really life-changing stuff that every care partner should know.
In this clip from our podcast, Teepa shares her experience of how cannabis medicine can help people living with dementia.
So initially people have really had to keep it under wraps. And so there was much more chatter and back and forth once you start talking with people who are living with dementia and their care providers than you'll hear out in public. Because people have been trying things for some time when pain is unremitting, when sleep won't come, when anxiety is so high people can't think. When they've tried other meds and they don't know what else to do, everything they try is a mess, or they find that what they've tried makes things worse, then they try things. And so what we know is anecdotally, people find frequently that adjusting dosages is really challenging if you can't get high quality, measurable types of cannabis that you can monitor. What you're giving is what you mean to be giving. And the challenge for most families and most individuals who've been doing this historically, because they've been doing it quite honestly, illegally in many cases, because that's the only way they could do it, is that they were doing the best they could. And now that we're starting to hear and actually report out what's going on with cannabis, I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift, and I think the shift is significant. I think there are more and more medical providers that are starting to say, you know what, it's a chemical like any other chemical, and there's not some magic thing about it. It's just, it should be treated and managed that way, and our challenge is just that there's such this stigma attached to it, just like there's a stigma attached to dementia. And maybe the good part is because there's a stigma to both, you know, people are willing to take risks that may not be taken in other situations. But the reality is we don't have a lot of things to offer people that are reasonable things to offer. So why wouldn't you try something that has very reasonable side effects and manageable often side effects? And many of the effects that it has, if you're using it accurately, you may find it may actually help appetite, but it doesn't have some other issues with it. It may have some other issues with it, in which case you sort of reevaluate. I mean, just like you should with anything you're trying to use to help. But I have seen some fairly remarkable differences in people's lives and the quality of their lives by being willing to go over that line, I guess is what we call it, about what people are okay with and what makes them anxious and nervous. The recent thing that people have done to try to reduce the use of antipsychotics in long-term care facilities, if we look carefully at the data, all too often what it's showing us is there's been a subsequent and equivalent increase in anti-anxiolytics, but they're the medications that have been shown to have side effects of increased falls, decreased alertness and arousal, increased skin tears, decreased ability to socialize, more drowsiness. So it's okay, so now we have another drug that we're going to have to deal with, so maybe we should start looking somewhere else. I think we're a long way to go if we think about all the variations of dementia to having cures. So we're going to be a long time figuring out how do we offer care that's the right kind of care. And part of it is offering people the right support for the care they're delivering. And, you know, this is where cannabis has a role. I do think we're starting to see more research. And I do think we're starting to see people go, okay, well, you know what? I'm not seeing harm. So let's just go ahead. And if people are willing and interested in doing this, let's just do it. It's legal.
Nice.
You know, and I think that's where things are starting to shift. We're seeing more and more areas and states and people just saying, I don't know what else to do. And it's like, well, do you want to give it a try? And people who are living, particularly with Lewy body, find for many of them, it is the difference between living decently, living well, or living miserably.
Yeah.
And having time to be, an ability to see you and not to be so distressed that you can't process anything. And being able to get some sleep.
Yeah.
You know, with Lewy body, getting sleep is such a huge part of having a good quality life. And the number of people that I work with that have Lewy body and use cannabis and can sleep, and they can't do it any other way unless they are not able to move, because then we have to give them things, and the whole series of things that people and families are provided with. Well, if you want the hallucinations not to be so awful, you're just going to have to potentially put up with no mobility. And it's like, well, is there any other option? It's like, well, let's try something that might not have that impact, that side effect on the extrapyramidal system.
Yeah, like cannabis.
Yeah.
As my mom was nearing the end of her journey, I came across a study that showed that CBD helps morphine work better. As my mom was dying, she had very labored breathing that they call a death rattle, despite all the morphine she was on. I tried a few drops of full-spectrum CBD oil between her lips and gums every hour, and it completely eased her breathing for 4 days until she peacefully left us.
Cannabis helped ease Mom's symptoms from the moment we started using it until her last breath. Cannabis eased her anxiety, aggression, and psychosis. It helped her feel lighthearted about her life situation.
Cannabis helped her enjoy her now and not worry about the fact she had no idea what was going to happen in the future, nor remember what happened in the past. Cannabis helped my mom and the whole family have a good night's sleep. It calmed her restlessness, lifted her mood, and relieved her pain. Cannabis medicine was the only treatment that ever eased the toughest behavioral symptoms of my mom's and our family's near-decade-long journey through Alzheimer's.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've learned a little bit more about how and why cannabis helps dementia and about what products to use, how much, and how often.
We hope this presentation has given you the confidence to try new things if you or a loved one is struggling. Find us at CoachChela.com for more education or private coaching.
Order our book from Amazon or check out Cannabis Helps Dementia podcast, where you can hear the complete interviews with today's experts and many more.
Thanks so much for your time. Wishing you all the best on your journey.